Okay. So we've got all of the participants that have joined, I believe, and I guess looking at the customers of ours that have subscribed to the webinar, I've tried to tailor the content to things that would be generally relevant. Not all businesses use all modules, so we'll try to cover the things that are going to be of value to you. In MYOB Advanced 2019.1, which was the major upgrade that happened in the last part of last year, there were actually over 100 new features or enhancements in that release, over 6 modules. And, you know, some of them affected the entire platform. Some were just specific improvements in specific functional areas. So what we're going to cover today is some improvements on financials, the financial module relating to closing of periods, subledger reconciliations, and there's also a new feature relating to master financial calendars. Then we'll have a look at some of the inventory and distribution improvements. So this release introduced some out-of-the-box barcode scanning capability, as well as improvements to how landed costs work and more flexibility around managing sales order pricing and discounts. So we'll touch on those aspects. The projects module had a range of improvements. Many of the customers on this webinar don't use the projects module, so we'll touch on some of them. But specifically, we'll look at project quotes, which are, I guess, part of the projects module, but also part of the CRM module. So we'll have a look at that. And I guess informational access in general is something that MYOB are focused on improving. Apologies for that. We'll carry on. Time permitting, we'll have a quick look at the service module, which is a brand new module that was introduced as a pilot. In this edition, there are a few companies around Australia and New Zealand using it now. So time permitting, we'll have a quick look at that. All right, so I'll switch over my monitor for you and bring up my browser. So firstly, I'm using our demonstration login for MYOB Advanced, but I'll also refer to the MYOB Advanced Education Centre, so help.myob.com, and under MYOB Advanced is where all of the new information about MYOB Advanced, as well as release notes, knowledge base, user guides and videos are kept. So I'll show you a bookmark for that later. But a lot of what, anytime there's a major new release or major new features, those are documented in the release notes, and they often produce new videos. For 2019, there were so many new features, they've actually created a particular tab, and that tab summarizes what all of the improvements are and has videos about the key ones. So if you haven't had a look at those already, then you can have a look at that in your own time. And that's just a a few-minute overview on a video of each of the key functional improvements that have occurred. All right, so we'll go through in the order of the agenda. We just want to look at financial period management. So earlier editions of MYOB Advanced were a little bit inflexible with how you could manage accounting periods being open or closed compared to the small business versions of MYOB. So they introduced a rationalised financial period management screen, and they also improved the functionality that you can do with financial periods. So previously they were either opened or closed, and once they were closed, you couldn't reopen them other than to do journals. Now they can be opened, deactivated, closed, or locked. That's all documented in the release notes, what each one of those means. Open obviously means active. Closed means inactive but can be reopened, and locked means fully complete, shouldn't be any further changes, and therefore you wouldn't unlock it. So at the end of each month, when you're completed your processing, you would or should be, for your current financial year, picking the month or months that need to be closed. By default, it will select backwards anything from the month you've selected and prior, because those should also be closed. Obviously, in my demonstration system, we've got every period open. And then you just click process for the ones that you have processed. Before you do that, you have access to an unposted documents report, which would show you if there are any unposted transactions or unreleased transactions relating to the periods you're about to close. So obviously you shouldn't close them if there are unreleased transactions. So you can drill into each one of those transactions and release it, refresh the report, and they will disappear off the report, and then you can go ahead and close those financial periods. For financial periods that are already closed, you have the option of reopening them later. So sometimes that happens, particularly on the accounts payable side, where an old supplier invoice might roll up and you do want to post it into the applicable accounting period. You do now have the ability to reopen that financial period in the ledger that you choose, and then process that transaction, release it, and then reclose that financial period. Other improvement that was made in accounts financials area is subledger reconciliations. So they introduced a number of new inquiry screens so that businesses can check that their subledger reconciles to the general ledger. Generally speaking, they should always reconcile, but occasionally they wouldn't, and that could be as simple as there are some transactions that have not been released, therefore they're in the subledger but not the general ledger. Or it could be that somebody has mistakenly processed a journal to a control account. So things like a monthly check that there are no reconciliation issues is a much easier thing to do now with these inquiry screens. So you can check for any discrepancies by account, which is general ledger account, by customer or by document for both accounts payable and receivable. So if I was to look by account, then the account I'm selecting is the control account for debtors or accounts receivable. If you have foreign currency, you might have different control accounts for the foreign currency. So you pick an account at a time, and then you pick a financial period. If nothing comes up, then that's telling me there are no discrepancies. I can untick show documents with discrepancies, and it will show me all the documents, and whether there is in fact a discrepancy on that account. So pretty straightforward to do, but it's an easier way now of making sure that the subledgers reconcile to your control accounts. Just back on financials as well, there's now a concept of a master financial calendar. So this is basically defining your financial years for each year, and those can go forward into the future. So we can have future financial years. What has been introduced in the most recent version is for businesses that have multiple entities or companies, and this is an example where we've got multiple companies operating in a single database. There was previously a limitation of having those multiple companies in the same database if they had a different financial year. Now, that would be unusual in Australia, but it does occur. Not-for-profits often have a January to December financial year, and you could have a New Zealand company as well as an Australian company, and they could have different financial years. So the master financial calendar and multiple financial calendars allows you to define financial years for different companies in the same database, and they can have different financial years and also different BAS reporting periods. So that was a improvement introduced in that version, not commonly used, but obviously for organisations that have multiple entities and different financial years, it's important to them. So just back to the agenda, inventory and distribution, there were quite a number of changes and improvements, so I'll pick out a few of the key ones for you and we'll look at those. The first one is automated warehouse operations, and that's where from this version, out of the box, there's some barcode scanning functionality. So you can purchase an Android barcode scanner or even use a mobile phone, iPhone or Android phone, and use that for various warehouse operations. And that would allow you to scan receive, scan pick, stock take, and do inquiries from a mobile device. Now, obviously, it's difficult to demonstrate a mobile device, so I will simply show the video of how that works. Just bear with me. So the barcode scanning allows, creates some custom screens to deal with a end-to-end process for receiving. So you have a purchase order in the system, goods arrive, you want to be able to receive and put away those items. So effectively replicate through a scanner an inwards receipt process. So the way that works is you have your receive and put away screen available. Using your handheld scanner, you can then scan a barcode on the receipt, which represents the receipt number. You can then scan into what location you're receiving into, and then start scanning products. So that will update the products into the inwards receipt as you scan them in. You may need to enter quantities, obviously, if the quantity that you're receiving is different to the PO. And it also supports things like serial numbers, lot numbers, and expiry dates. So again, through barcoded commands, you can then scan the next step, which can be to release. And effectively, that's the same as doing a manually processed inwards receipt using your terminal. You have the same option with pick, pack and ship. So instead of the separated process in the user interface where you might prepare a shipment or produce a picking document, pick the stock, prepare a shipment, and then release it, you effectively have pick, pack and ship all using the scanner. So you would scan the order number, scan the items on that order that you're picking. Again, you've got the ability to capture quantities, barcodes for serial numbers, as well as lot numbers. You can then scan the command that tells the system what you're doing next. So, for example, pack. That will then put the screen into pack mode, which is effectively where you're taking your picked items and boxing them up. You can scan a barcode representing what box or packaging size you're packing into, and then scan the items into the box. And then the confirm shipment step allows you to, again, through the mobile device, complete that shipment and confirm it. So that will effectively release it. The scanning supports your physical inventory count, so doing a stock take, where you have scan and count mode. So once you've initialized a physical inventory count, then using the device, you can scan products and enter quantities for your counts. You can also transfer between warehouses, so scan items from warehouse A and create a transfer to a separate warehouse. So there's a number of settings that get activated as a part of implementing that feature, so that those custom screens become available within the user interface for people that use them. And the mobile app is what's effectively running on the scanner. There's a new warehouse management icon, which gives the mobile app all of the functionality that we just went through in what the advanced screen looked like. So on the mobile app, this is effectively what you're seeing as a user using the device. So that's going through the same process where we've picked an item, now we're packing it into a large box, confirming the shipment. Android scanners, so you can use a mobile phone, but a mobile phone is not really designed as a scanner. You can get Android scanners for about $700. MYOB have a deal with a well-known hardware or point-of-sale supplier. So if you're interested in implementing the barcode scanning, then we can help you with that. So back to our agenda, looking at inwards receiving and landed cost changes. So a range of changes and improvements were made throughout purchase orders. And that includes anything from, I guess, visibility of what's happened on the purchase order. So they introduced a PO history tab, which shows all transactions that have occurred on a purchase order, be it receipt or AP bill. Obviously, there could be multiple receipts on a purchase order, and there could be multiple AP bills. In this case, the example was an inwards receipt. So certainly trackability and traceability within the interface is improved when you're dealing with inwards receipts. And in the receipt itself, some information was taken away, and that's the financial total information was removed from the receipt screen on the basis that commonly the store person or somebody at Inwards Goods wouldn't necessarily be responsible for the costing aspect. You do have unit cost information on the receipt and final and estimated inwards cost. So this is my receipt. I've received these items in full, 14 and 15. And this is an example of the put away history, which relates to if I was using warehouse management functionality, I'd see the history of that item being put into the particular warehouse. And I have a landed cost tab. Now, the landed cost tab used to be designed so that you could enter landed costs into this screen, but where landed costs were limited in previous versions, and it was quite common, if you're in importing and you have a consolidated shipment, so you have a container or a shipment that represents multiple purchase orders, potentially from multiple suppliers, it was quite difficult to add landed costs on the entire shipment and apportion it across multiple receipts or purchase orders. So this is now effectively a viewing screen to see what landed costs have been incorporated into that shipment. And there is a landed costs entry screen, which is a new transaction type. So the landed costs are commonly from a different supplier who you've purchased the goods from. So it's often a freight forwarder transport organisation. So in the landed cost screen, you would have your landed cost documentation or invoice from your freight forwarder. You have the landed cost tab, the document details tab are the key things we're working with. So landed cost codes can be set up to capture different costs and allocate them against the items that you have purchased in various ways: cost, volume, cubic, weight, or fixed amount. So in this screen, I've entered the landed cost amount from my freight forwarder's invoice, as well as the deemed GST. And in this tab, you're entering the receipts that those landed costs relate to. So in this case, there were multiple shipments. So I've got two different receipts which related to these products. And you can see I've got the unit of measure, the receipted quantity, the weight, the volume, the extended cost, and then the allocated amount of landed cost that's been apportioned to these items based on the landed cost calculations being by cost, by volume, etc. So what that does is obviously allows you to enter your bill for your landed cost supplier, whom you're going to pay separately to the inventory supplier, apportion the landed costs across multiple shipments or receipts, and those receipts can relate to multiple suppliers. And then it will update the cost for each of the items to reflect the correct average cost. So if I look at the transactional history for this particular product, so firstly I've done a receipt and it's been received in at a unit cost of $66.62, and then adding the landed costs later, which often is done later because you may not have your landed costs invoice yet at the time you receipt the stock, but the adding the landed cost then does subsequent adjustments to the cost, which then gives you a revised last and average cost, so that when you're selling that item out, your margin is the correct margin, taking into account landed costs, and your inventory valuation is including the landed costs. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. Sales order pricing and discount changes we'll have a quick look at now. Sales order or sales prices in general is a real strength of MYOB Advanced. You can have various ways of pricing, taking into account customer-specific pricing, pricing based on customer categories, as well as separate to that, discounts relating to all of those things and more. And those get applied to a sales order at the time you enter it. MYOB had feedback from some customers, though, that where they had specific pricing in place and they were looking to override that for a particular order, they wanted a bit more flexibility. And they also wanted to be able to maintain an order or a quote and then refresh the pricing, which would then recheck, is that the correct price based on all the pricing rules in the system. So a few things were done there. One is the actions recalculate prices, which then allows you to say for all lines on the order or just the selected line, recalculate everything, and then also decide what you want the system to do or what you want it to override if it does find a different price. So if the price in an order has been manually entered, do you want to override it? Same with the discount. So if a manual discount has been applied to the order, do you want to override it, yes or no? So it gives a lot more flexibility for customers using that type of pricing and discounting methodology to recheck pricing. So I'll just quickly go to a different order. So this particular order does have a discount already applied, and it has a manual price. So you could see that recalculating the price might change what the sales operator had entered. So you have the option to exclude it from overriding a manual price or not. There's also the ability to say disable the automatic discount update, so that any item added to this order would not automatically attract a discount. So we're basically doing, if you like, a special order for this customer, and we're deciding the price or the discount at the point of entry. So it gives, again, a little bit more flexibility to make sure that the system allows enough user or operator discretion to manage pricing and discounts without overriding what they're trying to achieve. While I'm going through these, in the release notes themselves, you can see for each functional area, even though I'm just going through a few, in the finance module there are around about 10 changes or improvements. Inventory distribution, about the same. And I'm just touching on what in our experience have been the key ones of interest for customers. So we'll move on to the next one, which is project quotes and how those relate to the CRM module as well as the projects module. So MYOB Advanced has quite a comprehensive CRM module that manages leads and prospects and contacts, opportunities relating to those, and those opportunities can be converted into sales orders, and as of this release, they could also be converted into projects. So an opportunity itself is pre-existing functionality. You have different opportunity classes, and different opportunity classes can then have a few different behaviours that are specific to that opportunity class or opportunity type, if you like. So they can have a different predefined list of sales stages, and they can require you to complete different attributes relating to that opportunity. And then you work through your sales process. So each opportunity can have what's called a quote. And a quote could be a project quote or a sales quote. So obviously if you're quoting for something that's going to become a project in your system later, then you would choose project quote. And if it's going to become a sales order where you're effectively delivering goods, then it would be a sales quote. Project quotes need to be enabled as a feature in your system. So if you're using projects and you don't see project quotes in the CRM or the projects module, we just need to enable that feature. So what a project quote looks like is similar to a sales quote in the header part, except that it has additional fields such as are we assigning a project template, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, who is the owner, who's the business account that we're quoting to, and you'll also see a bit more visibility around margin in a project quote than you do in a sales quote. So total sales value, total cost, margin dollars, margin percent. And then some different tabs down here. So we have an estimation tab, which are the item codes we're adding, which give us the price and cost information. So these are either stock or non-stock item codes, and each of those has a description, quantity, unit of measure, unit cost becomes visible, and extended cost, as well as unit cell, extended cell, and then we've got interaction with project tasks. So that's where a project template comes in. You can set up a template job or project, and that template job or project will have a predefined list of tasks. So this is an example of a construction project where we've got preliminaries, earthworks, plumbing, concreting, brickwork, etc. In a project, each of those can have its own budget, both revenue budget and cost budget, and then actuals versus budget can be tracked through there in the project module. So what we're doing when we're entering inventory IDs is we're allocating those to the project task. Now that's optional, but obviously if you do that when the project or when the converted to a project, then the revenue and cost budget for that project would be populated based on the task allocation here. So in this example, we've estimated 100 hours for this project task. So I can pick the project task. So we're saying preliminaries, 100 hours of labour, our cost rate's 75 an hour, our charge rate's 150, and the price is 15,000. For the next task, I can sort this in task order. We've also allowed some labour, 200 hours, we've got different tradespeople who do that, so it's a lower cost rate and a lower charge out rate. And then we've got some materials, so fine grade sand, that is being applied to the earthworks. 5,000 cubic metres at $12 a cubic. So without sort of going into the project module too deeply, each inventory ID links to what's called a revenue account group and a cost account group. So it's all revenue as far as the sell price is concerned. And then you can break your cost budget up into labour and materials. You can then break those cost groups down into lower levels of detail by using cost codes, where you might separate materials into types of material: sand, cement, road base, etc. And that all just drives reporting in terms of actuals to budget on a project. Project quotes, like any other quote, can go through an approval process. So if approvals was turned on, then this quote would have a waiting approval status. Once it's approved, it could then still be edited, resubmitted, reapproved, and then finally printed or sent to the customer. If I go back to my opportunity, another strength of CRM is the ability to have multiple quotes. So if that quote was sent to the customer or prospect and then they want a revised version, you could copy that, make changes to the copy without losing your history, and then that becomes your primary quote, which is the version that would be converted to the project. So how that flows through, in this case, the account that I'm looking to convert this project for is not yet a customer. So I would need to drill into this business account. So this is a company that's a prospect, not yet a customer. Convert them into a customer. Fill out the minimal details. And then you have options when you're converting your quote to a project to populate the labour cost rates, make the project active. If I don't make it active, it will still exist, but it won't be activated yet. And I can also choose to copy all of my notes and files that I might have attached in the opportunity. So that generates a new project with a project code linked to this now customer. And we will see that because I used the template, that all of the project tasks already exist. We have a revenue budget tab, which has been populated with those items linked to the relevant tasks, with the unit rate populated. And then our cost budget has also come across, so based on those same items, but using the cost rates for those items. So we've got a total cost value for the project, total revenue value for the project, and then all of that will track through via the balances tab, what our expected revenue is, what our expected costs are broken up into labour and materials, and you can continue on and prosecute that project. Some of the other improvements with projects is in earlier editions of MYOB Advanced, all projects were in the base currency of the company that you're operating. There is now the ability to have different currencies from both a overall project and a billing perspective. So that's introduced in this version of MYOB Advanced. Similarly, there's a lot more flexibility around labour cost rates. I won't touch on that just now because I'm conscious that we want to look into the reporting improvements. And there's also the ability to do budget forecasts. So a budget forecast gives you the ability to create revisions of your project budget, and those revisions can be tracked over time. You can then reforecast based on any of the attributes of those costs, so be they expenses or income. And you can forecast over time. So if you're adding financial periods, so one of the earlier limitations of the project budgets and forecast was that they were, I guess, an entire project budget, not spread over time. Whereas in the new version, you can actually spread your cost budget over the life of the project on a monthly basis, for example. So it could be a 6-month construction project. Okay, so just conscious on spending a bit of time on the improvements to generic inquiries and pivots, because those are something that would improve life for everybody. There's been a range of changes, ability to have different colour coding in generic inquiries, add pivot tables into the search grids, and add side panels to pivot tables. So I'll take you through a few examples of those. So I'll start with my standard sales order screen. So this is the out-of-the-box sales order screen, comes up with all records, and it may have a tab for my sales orders. Now, in my experience, very few people want to see every record in the system that's ever occurred, whether it's a sales order or an invoice or what it is. So you're often using filters to then say, for example, just give me the open orders, which is a much smaller list, and that's done by using a standard feature called filters, where you can create a filter, and in this case we're saying the status is not completed and it's not cancelled, therefore it's active. I can share that filter, which means everybody who uses the system would see this new tab called open orders, and you can also now make that the default. And what that means is when you come to the sales order screen, it will take you straight to the open orders tab rather than the all orders tab. So let's just go away from that screen, go back to sales orders. So it's taken me directly to the open orders tab, which is normally what I would want to see first. What's been improved with pivot tables? So pivot tables are a really good way of having on-screen access to information or reports. And those could be saved onto menus previously, but now they can be added as tabs to the different search or transactional screens that you use every day. So how you do that is on the filter line here, there's now ability to say save as pivot. And save as pivot then gives you a screen that looks like this. And pivot tables in MYOB Advanced are very similar to pivot tables in Microsoft Excel, if you're familiar with those. So I decided I want to see my customer on each row. I want a column for every month grouped by the year, and I want to see the value of their orders for each month and year. So from the list of available fields, you just drag them over. So I've made customer name my row. I could have used customer number, but I prefer customer name. I've grabbed order total, and I've thrown it over here. And I can aggregate that or add it up, basically, using a sum. Some things you might do a count or an average, but I want to see the sum. And then I've used the created on date, and I've dragged it down here twice. So the first time I did it, so it says created, I've given it a caption. So the caption is, what name does it show in the screen? So I'm calling it year. And then I've said down the bottom here, round this to years. And I've also ticked the option to collapse it, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Then the same field again, except expressed as months. So you have an option to say date part. So any field that's a date behind the scenes has hours, minutes, days, months, etc. So I can just pick out the bit from the date that I want to aggregate on. And so what that's giving me is by year, for all the data in the system, the total value of orders by customer, and I can expand that into the different months in that year. So a really quick and easy way to get a snapshot of information around customers and their sales information. So this is sales information based on sales orders. I could have done it based on accounts receivable invoice, which means invoiced sales. Down the bottom of the screen, you've got the ability to collapse all, which basically collapses it to the highest level, or expand all, which will explode out every year and all the months in that year that have data in them. So I think that's a really nice way of making information easily accessible without having to leave the screen you're in, go and run a report, and look at that information. So you can add pivot tables. Now you can have more than one pivot table. So if I wanted to do another one, then I could do that and go save as pivot. I give it a new name, and I might make it average or we could call it sales quantity pivot. And in that case, I could go and repeat the process, except instead of choosing order total, I might choose total quantity on the order, and that would give me, a different type of sales report on the screen on the fly. Other things that's been done with generic inquiries or pivots is the ability to do color coding and side panels. So I'll show you an example of that. We're going to look at receivables, invoices, and memos, so just the normal screen. I've already done a filter on this, which shows unpaid. So that filter basically says balance is not zero, and that's a shared filter, and it's my default. Again, because when I go to the accounts receivable invoices screen, I don't want to see every record ever. I only just want to see the unpaid ones, or click new and do a new one. You can see here that the due date field has a different color, and that's a new feature in a generic inquiry that enables conditional formatting of different fields in the inquiry using colors. So I'll show you how I did that. And also on this accounts receivable, I've done another pivot table, which is kind of like an aging. So it's unpaid invoices based on the month and year they were due. So if we have a look at that pivot, not too complex. I'm not a techie. I do simple ones. So I've grabbed customer name, similar to the sales one, where I've grabbed the due date field, because that's how things are aged, the due date on the transaction. I've used year and then month, and then I've grabbed the balance of the invoice. So I don't care what the original amount was. I just want to know what the balance remaining on that invoice is. And that's effectively what that pivot is giving me. How we did the color coding is in the generic inquiry. So if you're not familiar with the generic inquiries, they are a reporting tool in the system, but they're also what many of the main transactional or inquiry screens are already made up of. So a generic inquiry, you can create one from scratch, or you can copy an existing one. It's easier to copy existing ones and then change them than create new ones from scratch. Creating new ones does require, I guess, knowledge, some of which can be trial and error, of what tables or objects the data that you're wanting to report on lives in. Some of it's relatively easy to understand. AR invoice is accounts receivable invoice. BA account is business account, and that's where all customers and suppliers live, for example. So all this is pre-existing functionality. When you're creating a generic inquiry, you choose the tables the data is in. You may need to link the tables together by way of a common field. So this is basically saying that the customer ID in the invoice matches the business account ID in the business account table. I won't go through all of these things because I really just want to highlight the key new features. So the new features is allowing us to use styles and also aggregation. So what we've done to make the due date turn red is we've said, so I'm using the style column, and at the bottom of all the options here is an option called styles, which is a list of out-of-the-box color coding that you can select from. And we've basically said if the invoice due date is less than today, then make it red, otherwise don't. So I could have made it green if it was not due in the past, so it could be red or green. In this case, we've just made it red and it's normal color. And that's what causes the due date to turn red if the invoice is overdue. You could expand on that and say if the invoice due date was, say, more than 30 days prior to today, so 30 days old, make it red. And if it's less than today, but less than 30 days, make it orange, for example. So it's just an example of how you can use color coding to highlight things that might be relevant to you. And there's also an aggregation field. So if I go back to my inquiry, that's where the color coding comes in from the generic inquiry. A generic inquiry now can also have totals. So if I want to see the total of the amount column, so we'll sum that and save that. Balance. Apology, I think that's not showing because I'm modifying a standard transactional screen as a generic inquiry, but in a generic inquiry that you add, you would see a sum on that total. The other thing I wanted to show was the use of a side panel, which is the other main new feature on generic inquiries. So what we can do with a side panel is add extra information that you might want to view at the same time as viewing the record you've clicked on. So this is an example where I've made a side panel which shows me the customer record for the customer whose sales order I've got highlighted in this screen. So that's a really nice feature because somebody entering customer payments, for example, might want to see in the screen on the side what that customer's balance or overdue balance or credit limit is. Same with somebody entering sales orders, or you might want to be able to quickly look up who's the contact person at that customer that I deal with, and even look up their phone number and give them a call. So if you are telemarketing to customers and you want to be able to call them to confirm an order, then you can do it via the side panel. So how we do that, again, it's straight from the generic inquiry screen, and we have a navigation tab. The navigation tab allows you to navigate, so this is the drill through navigation, which is the sales order to open the order. And then I've added a second navigation screen, and this one is a side panel. So pretty simple to add that. I just basically select the screen that I want to link to. It needs to be relevant, obviously. So in this case, I've said, go through the menu, find my Manage Customers screen, and then it gives you the relationship or the data that you're using to open that. So whatever the account number is in the sales order is the same account number in the customer, and that's what makes the side panel select the right record. So side panels do use more screen space, obviously, so they will indent the screen you're looking at. You can resize things a bit, and you can also compress your menu so you're not using much of the space on the left, and you have enough space on the right to see what you want to see. All right, so we're at 11:05, so we've pretty much been running directly for an hour, covered hopefully areas that you find of interest to you. If you do want to go into more detail or have some assistance activating any of those features or implementing them, then obviously give us a call or shoot us an email and we'll help you with that. I'll open up for any questions. So I have muted everybody, but if anybody has any questions, you should be able to unmute your phone and fire away. And I do want to quickly mention the next release, which we're very interested in because it includes a whole range of improvements to the payroll module, especially including the introduction of a employee self-service module for payroll, where employees can update their own details online. They can request leave, and that leave request can go through an approval process. That can be done in the application or on their mobile phone. And would update the pay. Managers will have access to an employee or a team calendar so they can see all of the leave requests for all employees that might report to them, and it will flow through to payroll. It also has public holiday improvements, where public holidays can be managed en masse, so particularly Christmas, Easter can be very time-consuming to manually manage. So that release will start getting rolled out during March and throughout April. So those improvements will roll into your payroll module at the time. So thanks for your time this morning, and as I said, open the floor to any questions.
Oh, did he? No. I'm not unmuted.
Okay, looks like there's no questions. If you have attempted to unmute your phone and ask a question, apologies. I just went through and unmuted everybody. I wasn't hearing any questions.
I have a question.
Okay, hi, Micah.
Hi, how are you? I was just looking at, my client extensively uses projects now. And I can see that the warehousing is linked to organizations which sell. But I would be interested in a warehouse system, but for delivering, linking with the customers' different projects. So the customization I would want is, okay, instead of just a warehouse system to resell goods, I would want a warehouse system where I can actually cost different projects. Okay, sort of receive projects into the warehouse, but then allow me then to transfer costs from the warehouse to different projects. I don't know whether that is workable.